Certainly glad to see Farron and Sandra with us. And Josh back. Josh has been sick recently, and Brother Gene is out. He's sick. So it's almost to that point where it's easier to count the survivors than it is those sick. But certainly glad to be with you. I don't know about you. I mentioned in the prayer, but it is just such a, today was such a beautiful day, wasn't it? And you could really see the changing of the leaves. I couldn't help but think, early this morning I was out and the sun was just barely breaking, and the changing of the leaves. You know, God had designed the seasons from Genesis 1, you know, made the sun, the moon, the stars for seasons, months, and years, and so on. And he made it, he designed it where, you know, we'd go into dormancy, then spring, we would come back, summer, maturity, full growth, leaves, pollen, all that, reproduction. And then fall, going back. And I just couldn't help but think how wonderful that even in the going into dormancy, you have the beauty that he designed and all that. Don't you think so? Just the absolute beauty of nature. Seems to me to suggest a designer, an inventor, a creation, or a creator behind everything we see. Glad we can be together. Appreciated David. David okay tonight, or is he? Yeah. David took care of the class, and I was able to listen to it and appreciate where he got to. We come down to the crucifixion. I've actually got some things printed out relative to the medical aspects of the crucifixion of Jesus. I was talking to David the other day, it might have been a week ago, Wednesday. Years ago, I may have told some of you, years ago somebody pointed me to an article that came out in the JAMA, or JAMA, J-A-M-A, Journal of American Medical Associates. And it's on the medical aspects of the crucifixion. And there's a 9-page article, and I've got it, it's being printed, and so hopefully I'll have it for you on the Lord's Day, and we'll glance at it, but you can have it for your own material. But I thought it was good. When I got it, it was pretty new. It's a new article. 1986 is how many years ago? 38? Yeah, 38 years old. And yet it's nothing really has changed. All right, in our readings, we're going from Matthew 27 to Mark 7. Remember, Matthew emphasizes what aspect of Jesus? His kingship. And Mark, the best I can tell, some say his servanthood, servitude. I think more of his miracles. In fact, some outlines I've seen have the first 10 chapters of Mark deal more with his signs, and 11 through 16 his suffering. That's if you want to keep the alliteration. But in Matthew 27, which is really where we've been, we have the trial of Jesus, part of the trial, as well as what we're studying right now, his crucifixion. And 28, his resurrection, and some of the appearances. In Mark, you know, we've quoted Matthew 1:1 a lot. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Immediately, the very first verse of Matthew ties what Matthew is talking about back to David and Abraham, indicating the Old Testament connections. Mark begins in such a way, it's just like, here we go. You know, we're not going backwards, we're going forward. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. All right, not the son of Abraham, the son of David, the Son of God. And then immediately he starts speaking not of Jesus, but not of Jesus' birth, but who? John. And so we have John introduced, and in the verse 2, I send my messenger before who shall prepare your way. And then we have Jesus coming to John to be baptized of him. Then in verse 12 and 13, Jesus goes and is what? Tempted. And in 14 and 15, by 14 and 15, Jesus is about ready to go into where? Galilee. So we have the years of preparation completely dismissed in Mark. We have the beginning ministry, this baptism, this temptation, and then great Galilean ministry, all in chapter 1. And so Mark's point is, let's get on with the story, talk about some of his miracles. And so Mark immediately goes into Galilee. And there's when we try to put these books in a bigger light, Matthew, the emphasis on the kingdom of heaven, and Mark, we mentioned the miracles. But here's a word, Mark 1 verse 12, and what? The Spirit driveth him. Immediately. And verse 21, they go into Capernaum and immediately. Look at verse 23. And does yours say immediately?
So just then.
What was that?
23.
Just then, yeah, okay. Mine's, the American Standard says straightway. Look down at verse 28. The report of him went out immediately. And verse 29, immediately, or straightway when they came out. There is a drive to the story, the narrative of Jesus. Unlike other accounts, there's more of a drive to get on to all these miracles. And there are a number mentioned even in chapter 1. Chapter 2, we have the healing of a fellow what was his problem in the first paragraph?
He's paralyzed.
That's right, he was paralyzed. And these 4 fellows led him down through the what? The roof, tile roof, took up the tile and let him down. And that's where Jesus said, "Son, thy sins be forgiven." That's right. How can he do this? Nobody can do that but God. Oh, yeah. Well, which is easier to say, "Thy sins be forgiven," or take up your bed and walk? And so if he could do one, which only God could do, then that showed he had the authority to do the other. It's interesting, even in 2, they start accusing Jesus of healing on the Sabbath. And in chapter 3, he heals the man with the withered hand, and they just about want to kill him. And so he withdraws in verse 7. A great multitude follows him. And then in chapter 3, we have the 12 are mentioned, the 12 apostles, down in verse 15. Let me back up here. 14. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, that he might send them forth to preach, to have authority to cast out demons. Simon he surnamed Peter, James the son of Zebedee, John the brother of James. Then he surnamed, and them he surnamed Boanerges, which is sons of thunder, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. And so they continue on. Now in chapter 4, 4 is parallel to Matthew 13 and Luke 8, when Jesus begins to preach in parables. And Mark has one parable that Matthew does not. In verse 26, this is after the parable of the sower. He said, "So is the kingdom of God as if a man should cast seed upon the earth, and should sleep and rise night and day. The seed should spring up and grow. He knows not how. The earth bears fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, then the full grain." In other words, you look for it, you've planted it, you look day, nothing, and then all of a sudden the earth pops open, and a little blade comes up, and then it grows, and when the fruit is ripe, they put a sickle to it, and the harvest is come. And we won't dwell on this, but the parable of the sower that's recorded here in Matthew and Luke's account indicates the different reactions to the preached word, different hearts. And you have to remember the 4 kinds of seed. And then Mark's account records this seed growing of itself that Matthew and Luke do not record, evidently to show that there's power. There again, power. Power in the seed, power in the Word of God that oftentimes we cannot see. We don't see the results of it. How many times in your life and mine has somebody, preacher, teacher, we've been listening to said something and it really rang a bell. I mean, it really got us, and we started thinking and mulling and maybe changing our behavior. And that seed was working in our hearts in almost an imperceptible way to those who are about us. You look like you were going to say. You probably have some story with listening to Brother Ward way back that you were thinking, and Robin didn't even know what you were thinking. It was working in your life in ways that probably with Lauren just recently, and it's just it works on. I know it did in mine. I have told you folks. I've told you what things Brother Gardner Hall used to mention in training classes, and I was there. And nobody, if you'd been there, and if you'd been an adult when I was a kid, I wouldn't say, well, he'll probably never even become a Christian. People could have thought that, but they thought I just sitting there, but I took it all in. I really did. I just didn't move on it when I should, but I took it in. And I think that's the point, and I don't mean to belabor that, but that's a tremendous parable in Mark's account, not covered in the others. Chapter 5, Jesus cast out demons in 2 men, and there's a lot of good information in Mark 5 about demon possession, how it caused these people basically to have superhuman strength. They could not control themselves, they cut themselves, they were not in their right mind, went about even naked. Notice in verse 15, they came to Jesus, and behold, him that was possessed with demons sitting, clothed, and in his right mind. He was not in his right mind when he was demon possessed. And so he wanted to do something. The Lord said, go home and tell people what great things you've seen. In the 6th chapter, Jesus goes, he's at Nazareth, and he sends the 12. And then in chapter 7, we have an interview with, well, not an interview, but kind of a back and forth, kind of a dialogue, not a dialogue either. It's just it's an argument. Let's just go ahead and tell it what it is. It's an argument with some who? Pharisees. And they say, telling Jesus, you're violating the Sabbath, well, the traditions of the elders, because you don't wash your hands ceremonially before you eat bread. And so we have a long dissertation with Jesus, and then he takes we have the Syrophoenician woman that Jesus down in verse 26. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by race, and she besought him that he would cast forth the demon out of her daughter, and he did. And that is about where we'll end for tonight. Comment or question on any of that? Anything? Charlie, you have something? Oh, okay. All right. Let's go to where we are in our study of the life of Jesus, and we've come down to the crucifixion. Again, I appreciated David's taking care of things. I've got a couple of charts here. We'll remember where we are. Now we've got a lot of information on just matters of a few hours. Whole lot of information. Where, like in Genesis 5, we've got hundreds of years that are compressed into just a few words. And then this is where we've been, and now we're on the day of suffering, Friday, and again, just backing up, the third stage of the Roman trial, Jesus was before Pilate the second time. Did Pilate want to release him or not? Yes, he wanted to release him. And 3 times, Pilate says, I find no fault in this just man. And what really did it, and I think David did a really fine job emphasizing that, what really did it was the emphasis, if you let this man go, you are not friends of Caesar. His political career was at stake. And so he has Jesus scourged, thinking that might mollify some of their desire. It didn't though. And so he brought him back out, and said, but a little bit I told you all, I think a week ago, and it's interesting in John 19 account, behold the man, and then a little bit later, right before he sentences him, behold your king. He's the man and the king. All right, then he reluctantly sentences Jesus to be crucified. So here we are. He on the way to the cross. By the way, the Catholics, 500 years after Jesus, put some what they call stations after Hadrian came in Rome. In Jerusalem. His mother was interested in relocating some of these sites, and they put what they think are 14 places or stations that began with the sentencing by Pilate and ending with his being placed in the tomb. A few, 3 or 4 of them are Bible related, but most are just traditional. But there's a Latin phrase that you've probably all heard of before, Via Dolorosa. Have y'all heard that? Some of you have Via Dolorosa. Via is Latin, the way, and Dolorosa would be the way of suffering, the way of suffering. And so we've been on that already. But here, we'll read these passages in just a second. But there was about a 3-hour, best we can tell, roughly around 3 hours from the time that Pilate sentences Jesus, around 6 in the morning, to what the Jews called the 3rd hour of the day, which would have been about 9 o'clock. And isn't it interesting? What went on the 3rd hour of the day? Now, don't think about Pentecost, but insofar as the temple is concerned, sacrifices, that's right. The morning sacrifices at the 3rd hour of the day, around 9 o'clock in the morning. And then what happened about the 9th hour of the day? The evening sacrifices would be over, or would occur. And we know, without going ahead of it, how long was Jesus on the cross before he died? About 6 hours. Starting about 9 in the morning, and then by 3 in the afternoon, he died. So we have all of those beautiful shadows that are seen fulfilled in Jesus Christ. We'll say more about that in a little bit. So on the way, sometime before 9 a.m. without Jerusalem, Jesus begins the way to the cross. Soldiers take off the purple robe and replace it with his own garments after he's been what now? Scourged. That's right. They lead him out. Simon of Cyrene, northern Africa, father of Alexander and Rufus, Mark's account mentioned, is compelled. The word compelled means to impress or press into duty by the Roman government. Not something, hey, would you like to do that? We'll pay. No, you do this. And we'll see something more about that in our notes. The malefactors are taken with him. So it's not just Jesus. The other 2 are going with him on the cross. Sometimes we've seen pictures of Jesus as kind of by himself carrying the cross, but actually there were the 2 others on the way with him. And then great multitudes follow. Women are particularly mentioned. And then he arrives at the Golgotha, or the place of the skull, and they give him wine, mingled. One Matthew, I think, says gall and myrrh in Mark, or maybe it's just reversed, gall in Matthew and myrrh in Mark. But the wine, all of that would be a kind of an analgesic. It would kind of knock. It would be a pain reducer to a degree. But what did Jesus do? He refused to drink it. He would drink the cup, if you please, to its fullest, the cup of suffering to the fullest. Okay, let's read some of these passages here. Brother Charlie, if you would, let's just read them in order. Matthew 27, 31 through 34. Glad to have you with us. Robin, if you would, Mark 15, 20 through 23. Sister Sandra, Luke 23, 26 through 33. And could be the lone eagle, Brother Farron, just John 19:17. But that's all we have on that passage. All right, Matthew 27:31 through 34.
After they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off him, put his own garments back on him, and they led him away to crucify him. As they were coming out, they found a man, a Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. And when they came to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with the gall, and after tasting, he was unwilling to drink.
Yeah, you'll notice the reason we've divided, or a lot of men divided here, and when they had crucified him. So then, the deed has already begun, and so that really falls into another part. Let's go to Mark's account. Mark 15:20 through 23. Robin, Mark 15:20 through 23.
After they had mocked him, they took the purple robe off him and put his own garments on him, and they led him out to crucify him. They pressed into service a passerby coming from the country, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross. Then they brought him to the place of Golgotha, which is translated place of the skull. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it.
All right, and Luke's account, Sister Sandra, Luke 23:26 through 33.
I'm going to let Farron take the long one, I'll take the short one.
Oh.
He's got more breath than I do.
Okay, that's fine. Luke 23:26 through 33, Brother Farron.
26 through 33.
Right. A little bit more information in this passage.
Now, as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. And a great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills cover us. For if they do these things in the greenwood, what will be done in the day? And there were two other criminals led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left.
Okay, thank you, Brother Farron. In this passage, we've already learned about Simon of Cyrene, and even in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it would seem like, well, they just got Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross of Jesus from the very beginning. John's account gives additional information that Jesus began, and then Simon was compelled to help him carry the cross, or carry it for him a little later. Another thing, in Luke's account that Brother Farron just read, we have some information that's not included in Matthew, Mark, or John, and that is these women who are following and bewailing, lamenting him, and in essence he says, don't weep for me, but weep for whom?
For yourself.
Yourselves and your children. That's right. And in essence, what he says in 29 and 30 and 31 is the times are coming when it's going to be terrible. The destruction of Jerusalem.
The siege.
The siege, that's exactly right. And so it would be better for people never to have children than to have to go through these things. And it's as if, look, you're weeping for me, but it's almost as if Jesus is turning and saying, look, what they're doing to me is going to bring the end to them as a nation. And yes, sir, did you want us?
No.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
About the cross. Do they know what kind of dimensions and all of what? Because you see it portrayed as like the upright and the cross piece. Then you see just the cross piece.
Yeah.
And, it had to be of some kind of significant weight, understanding that the Lord
Yeah.
he was just torn up at that point, blood loss and everything else. He couldn't have managed it. But I often thought about it was the size of a railroad tie. And in my younger days, I used to sling a railroad tie, 2 railroad ties, and just go anywhere with it. I couldn't even imagine picking up something like that now, especially in that kind of condition.
Yeah, there's no, and in that article that I mentioned, that it has quite a bit, they're divided as to what it might have looked like in their names for these, but just a straight bar with a vertical coming in. Then the more commonly thought is that there was an extension of the vertical stake, and then a little bit lower, you had the cross beam. And then there are those who think it was like an X. And quite frankly, from what I've read, all of those were used. And so it's just difficult to know exactly what it looked like. There are a lot of historians who say that the main post remained in the ground, and that the ones who were executed would take their on, and then they would actually, it's pretty gory, but actually spread them out on the ground and nail them on the ground, and then lift them and put them on the
What
post.
kind of wood was this thing made out of? Because
Don't
there's
know.
not a whole lot of wood choices over there.
When I was young, they said dogwood.
Yeah.
But there's no way to know.
That was tradition.
Yeah, that's all
It was a
tradition.
tall tree at the time.
Exactly, yeah. There's just no way to know. Hold on till Sunday, Josh, and we'll have that article, and it'll answer probably a lot of the questions, even in the nailing, what they have understood where the nails would probably have been. Yes, sir.
I was reading that where he turned to tell the women, don't be crying.
Yeah.
What are we, like 50 days away from when Peter gives us.
Pentecost,
Tells
yeah.
them, you did this.
Yes.
Y'all did this.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they can think back and say, he's right.
Yes, we just studied recently where, I think David went with you through it. His blood be upon us and our children, including their children. And then what they offered to have the guilt of that deed done placed on themselves and their children. When it was done, it actually offered pardon for themselves and their children. To you is the promise, and to your children, and to as many as the Lord our God shall call. Acts 2:39. So there's so many ironic statements that are made around the cross here. Yeah.
No, that's what.
Yeah.
But he did carry it a little ways, and they seen he could carry it, so that's what they pressed the siren into service.
Yeah. That's one of those cases, Josh, that even the song we sing, the load was so heavy, he fell beneath the load. What's the name of that song we sing? It may have been that way. It just doesn't say it. Did he carried it? He started. Well, let's go. Let's read the passage and we'll come back to it. Sandra, John 19:17.
And he, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of the skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha.
Yes. And so who started to carry his cross? He did. Yeah, he did. And then they compelled Simon, who was a foreigner traveling in Jerusalem, to compel him to take his cross a little later. Whether or not he fell under the load, the Bible doesn't say. I remember hearing a preacher one time say, one of my favorite songs, "Tell Me the Story of Jesus," but there's a phrase in there, writhing in anguish and pain. To writhe, you know what to writhe means? It's you're squirming, it's just he may have, but does the Bible say he did? It doesn't. And that's where we have to be careful to separate what some say about Jesus, what he did, how it must have been, and what actually the Bible says. You just have to be careful about that.
But
He
you
may
have to
have.
imagine, I guess that's implied that I can understand what people would suppose that he did, because
Yeah.
if your back is torn open,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're carrying this rough cross,
Yeah.
it's not gonna feel good and you're,
Oh, no,
You know,
every bit of it was going to be tremendous suffering.
I don't think that would be too far from, a
Yeah.
bad assumption.
Yeah, you just can't say it for sure, you know.
Can't say for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The scourging, was that customary for crucifixion?
Yes, preliminary to it, yeah. Mhm.
Were the thieves scourged also?
I'm sorry, what was that,
Were
brother?
the thieves scourged? Did they-
Evidently so. It was usually the preliminary to an execution. And you know, it would, y'all know, all of us know, if you see somebody getting beaten up like that, and and the Roman authorities are behind it, and well, what did he do wrong? Whatever he did wrong, I don't want to do it. Well, in essence, it strikes fear in those who see it. And it's intended. I think it was the Assyrians, maybe before the Assyrians, who actually impaled, and you know what that is.
Yeah, they stuck them on the stick.
Yeah. It is. I mean, can you imagine put somebody, I can't even imagine what kind of a person it would take to do that. But they did it. And it would strike hard in captives that they would take. If this is going to happen, what you see he looks like is going to happen to you if you cross us. And so it becomes a... Okay, so 1917, Sister Sandra read, they took Jesus, he went out bearing the cross for himself, and then the skull in the Hebrew Golgotha. All right, let's answer some of our questions, and then we'll do a discussion from that. Did Jesus begin to carry the cross on his own, or did he have to have help immediately?
On his own.
He was on his own. The passage, we just looked at it, John 19:17. From what is stated, who usually carried the cross on which the prisoner was to be crucified? The prisoner himself, yeah. And everything about crucifixion is just to me, it's a horror story. You're taking the very instrument on which you're going to be killed. You just let that revolve around in your mind a second. That I am taking the thing on which I'm going to be nailed. The brutality of this cannot be overestimated. What events have thus far? Did somebody say something? Did you? Was that? Okay, I thought I heard somebody want to say something. What events have thus far transpired which would lead us to believe why the Romans compelled one to bear his cross? Josh, I think, mentioned that. What had happened to Jesus preceding all this?
Well, he hadn't eaten all night.
That's
He'd been
right.
up without sleep. He'd been beaten and scourged.
Yes, good answer. Yeah, you think about it, he's been up all day Thursday. Then Thursday night, he's left by his friends when he's taken, and then there's a lot of walking back and forth. Some have estimated 2.5 miles, and he's been beaten, and then he's walked from one place to another, and then he was scourged, and then he's trying to walk out to be crucified. So all of that, even in, I think it's this article, I've read several of them, but I think it's in this article that I want to give you Sunday, that they say, it was Janet, hypovolemic shock, and the low, isn't that, Kirsten, that's low blood pressure, isn't it? Hypovolemic shock. You're supposed to know all these things.
Well, he lost a lot of blood.
and then loss of blood, and then he has asphyxiation because of your arms being held up and not being able to exhale. And said, I think it ends by one portion of it says, this is the matter of death. A person would die who was in good health. It's just, it's really shocking.
Also, Philip, back in the garden, when he was praying.
Sweat.
Yes, and he was in agony, and that
Oh yeah.
will tax your physical body before all that other abuse.
Yes, we had an article on hematidrosis, which would have dehydrated him. And I have, somebody told me back when I had COVID, said, you're dehydrated. I said, well, I drink water, drink a lot of coffee. But he said, hey, you need to, that's a problem. You got to, and even sometimes when we think we have access to clear water and all that we can become dehydrated to a degree that it weakens us. We just feel tired when we're dehydrated.
Well, the sodium is what helps your muscles somehow. It helps them also when he's sweating, he's losing all the salt out of his body, and
Yeah.
the muscles are getting stiffer and
Yeah.
painful, I guess, cramping.
You think about cramping on the cross. That's another part of it. The muscle, flexing of the muscle. Ooh,
Lactic acid builds up in your
Yeah.
muscles.
yes, yes.
When we talk about his humanity and the agony he was going through knowing that this was fixed to happen,
Yes.
to me, that weighed on me more than anything else.
And that's, all of this likely led to his sweating, as it were, great drops of blood. That the agony of just the mental, we're going to have a surgical operation. Most of us, there's a little bit of, what's the good word? Anxiety going into it. You hope everything goes well. What's it going to feel like when it comes out? How much rehab am I going to have to go? All those questions you have circulating in your mind. And the only way out of this is death. Death is your only release.
At this point, he also had the crown of thorns, would have been painful and
Yeah,
blood.
likely blood just down on his face. I haven't mentioned this passage, but just if you can think, they spit on him, they hit him with the palms of their hands, their fists, and he's black and blue, and then this crown of thorns. So obviously blood is running down. He's been bruised all over his face. I don't know how much. Well, not a bone of him was broken, so they didn't break his jaw. But often when you hit, you break it. But the bruise, what do you call it? Not concussion. Contusions. Yeah, thank you. Kirsten, you haven't said a word. You're supposed to be the expert on all of this biology.
He was hit with reeds too.
Yeah, we call it
Yes.
switches.
Yes, hit with reeds, all of that. He just looked, he would have looked like a mess. Turn back real quickly, keep your finger there. Turn back to Isaiah.
I was fixed.
What was that?
I was just thinking.
You were
that
thinking
was
with me, weren't you, Sister Janet? Yeah.
All prophesied.
If you start in 52 of Isaiah, that last paragraph, verse 13, begins really the exaltation of the servant who is the Lord, the Messiah. Behold, my servant shall deal wisely. He shall be exalted and lifted up and shall be very high. Like as many were astonished at thee, his visage. What does your translation have for that? Appearance? Was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths at him. That which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they understand. Who hath believed our message, and to whom hath the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. So a lot of things are mixed and mingled here with the casual look, or the look of Jesus was just like any other person. He had no form or comeliness. But then earlier, the visage, the appearance was marred more than any. And you can just almost picture that. There was no pristine, clean, sanitary look of Jesus on the cross. It was bloody, gory, bruised, half dead. You know.
And how he had the energy to talk after all that while on the cross, so that they
Yeah.
have dialogue with him, it's amazing.
Possibly the reason why some thought he was calling on Elijah when he said, you know, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some says he's calling you because the words were similar. And likely with the inability to exhale, this short breaths, you know, very little in and out, that you're speaking in hushed tones just about, because like you said, you can't do any more than that.
And Philip, the trial ended around 6 a.m. and then his, is that correct?
Yeah, about-
Approximately, and then his crucifixion didn't start till 9.
Around 9.
So we had those 3 hours in between.
They're jeering and taunting and
Yeah.
hitting him, spitting on him, yeah.
Before he.
And some speculate that there'd been, there would have been some time that they would needed to get some of their stuff ready for the crucifixion itself. And then, Pilate had written on the tablet, this is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And of course they didn't want that. They came back to Pilate, but all that had to be done. Yeah, so it took some time. Yeah. Okay,
Bob said he was led like a lamb to the slaughter.
yes.
He really was slaughtered.
It was a slaughter. It was a slaughter. You're exactly right. It was a slaughtering of a human being.
Torturing slaughter.
Mhm. Yeah.
Would his spirit be so low because during all this physical stuff, but his spirit at this point, was he just so low because he could, at what point did God the Father say withdraw from him? Is that, I may not be getting that right, but at some point, did God withdraw from, did the Father withdraw from him?
I don't think
Because
so.
he was taken on.
No, I don't think he was.
I'm trying to say this correctly. but-
Yeah. No, he just died as a human being, I don't think God, there's some who think God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That God somehow turns his back on Christ. It's actually the quotation from the 22nd Psalm that he quotes, that David made. And I think it blends in, yet we, to Isaiah 53, we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God. He looked as if God had abandoned him. I don't believe God did.
I apologize for not.
Yeah, no. What you said is a lot of folks will say it, and I think God was with him to the end, but it appeared to others as if, well, surely, if he's God's son, God's going to do something for him and take him out of this misery. But then the time I couldn't explain, Josh, as to the timing of all of it, except God knew what would happen, and it happened just according to his plan.
And he had to fulfill all of them.
All the prophecies, yeah. There's an interesting idea also, we haven't gotten to it yet, but when, in Exodus 12, when the Passover lamb was, turn over real quick, all the way back to Exodus 12. You remember the Passover, the 10th plague is about to occur. And the Passover instructions are given in chapter 12 of Exodus. I want you to notice in verse 5 and 6, well, really at the end of verse 6, but 5, your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. Ye shall take it from the sheep or from the goats, and ye shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it. Now, the American Standard text reads at even or at evening, but the marginal reading for that word is between the two evenings. Yours may have dusk, twilight, yes. And so it's not the usual word for evening, it's a different word. It's between the two evenings. Kyle and Dalitz in their comments make the point that if you look at 3 o'clock in the afternoon as when the final sacrifice for the day was always offered, and then you have 6 o'clock we say the going down of the sun, when the evening actually began, then it would have been 3 to 6, basically when the lamb, the Passover lamb, would have been prepared. And then at evening, when the going down of the sun, they would have eaten it. So in the 3rd to the 6th hour would have been the preparation for the eating of the lamb. You think about Jesus. He dies, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then there's some preparations made by Joseph of Arimathea, and he's in the grave before 6 o'clock. You talk about, wow. The Passover of Exodus 12, the instructions were such that it just mirrors exactly what happened in Jesus' crucifixion at 3 and his burial at 6. Or before the going down of the sun that day to get the 3 days and 3 nights. You talk about just, I came across that when I was teaching Exodus years ago. I came across that and I noticed, and I hadn't thought about it before, and I noticed that footnote. And I did some reading on that, and then I did some more reading on that, and then it was just like eye-opening. It's like, wow. When you put all those details together, it's just it's mind-blowing. Well, it's 5 till also. Let's just stop. Let's stop. We'll have to pick up with C. We finished B, didn't we? We didn't do C. No, we did C. Yeah, D is where we'll begin, Lord willing. Okay. Final comment or question, anybody?